Ready? Good afternoon. I'd like to call the, what is today? May 12th Public Works meeting to order. First order of business is roll call and determination of quorum. Brenda, if you would.
Estes.
Here.
Doyle.
Here.
Roberts.
Here.
Scott. Wright. We have a quorum.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to the adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes, corrections, additions, deletions? Seeing none, I would look for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved. Second.
Have a motion by Estes, a second by Roberts. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the agenda?
Aye.
We have one by John Roberts. Okay, agenda is adopted. Thank you, gentlemen. Now this is a time for general public comment. Time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to this committee on any issue not limited to items on the agenda. Action will, however, not be taken at this meeting on any issue not on the agenda except by placement by unanimous vote of the aldermen present. I see no general comment forms. Have we missed anybody? Seeing none, moving on to consent, items 1 through 15. I'll now open public comment for items 1 through 15. I have received no speaker comment forms for public consent items 1 through 15. And looking at the audience, it appears there is none. We'll now close it and move on it. Would any committee member like to remove an item 1 through 15 for separate consideration? Seeing none, I would look for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
I have a motion by Estes, and I have a second by Roberts. Is there any discussion? Does anyone want to pull number 13? I know that
Pull 13?
or should we just keep it with 16? Because you see
One
the
is just
separation.
to provide water, and the other
Okay.
oversizing. So.
Okay, seeing none, we do have a motion to approve consent calendar as presented, items 1 through 15. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Consent calendar is approved. We're now moving on to non-consent items. Yes, sir. Could you speak on your microphone?
So I'm on the right one. Item number 13, if it's on the consent calendar, I don't know if we should, I think we should pull it, vote it separately after discussion on item 16. Otherwise, we're approving something and haven't handled the issue in item 16. Is that fair?
Would you like to? I'll go ahead and go over to our Public Works Director, please. Mr. Wolterstorff, if you would.
Well, technically, you should approve item 13 before you consider item 16, because unless you're going to provide water, we don't need to talk oversize. So staff's recommendation was to approve the service for outside city limits, and so that's why it's on consent. So I would recommend leaving it on consent and approving it.
Okay, but that service recommendation is contingent upon the terms of 16, correct?
No, it's not.
Not.
The service can be provided. The issue of oversize or what amount the city may or may not pay is really a separate issue.
But we're going to provide service only if those terms are agreed to by the city and them, correct? Am I thinking wrong or?
Well, it
Apparently there's no
could
water
be,
main.
yeah, the terms ultimately the city council will approve as part of 16. Your terms may be we're not providing any revenue to help out or money to help out, or we're providing everything, which is what they're requesting. So the manner in which the water gets out there is what number 16 really is talking about.
I understand that. But we're not going to do it unless we agree with that in 16. So, okay. Not that I'm against
Are
it.
you good with that, Alderman Wright?
Leave it on consent calendar, that's fine.
Okay. Moving on,
For
we'll
now.
open public comment. Thank you. We'll open public comment for items 16 through 20 on the non-consent. I do have 2 speaker request forms for item number 16. Looks like we'll go to Ted Schultz first.
Good afternoon. Thank you for considering this item. I'm Ted Schultz with Advanced Engineering and Environmental Services, also the facility manager for the Rushmore Hockey Association. So I'm kind of wearing 2 hats today. And we're doing the design work as AE2S, and I'm also representing Rushmore Hockey here. We're a 100% volunteer organization, and we've got James Johns with us today, our vice president. We've got Brad Booth in the audience as well today, who is I took his place. He's our former facility manager. So with that, I've got a letter that I had sent out earlier. I think a lot of you have that letter, and if you don't, I have extra copies. We have done a design and a cost estimate and received some pricing from a contractor. We're looking at a project cost for a 12-inch water main of approximately $330,000. The 8-inch cost is estimated at about $251,000. And so our intent is to provide water service to our facility, in part for multiple reasons. One is firefighting capabilities. We have no firefighting capabilities at all right now. We're served off a private well, and we do have a sprinkler system that is not pressurized or usable in any way right now. And so we are at the point where we'd really like to get a fire suppression system connected to that facility. We also have a high iron content in our water from this private well that we have, and it is very difficult to treat and very hard on equipment, and is costing an extraordinary amount of money to maintain and operate. So we have about 360 skaters at Rushmore Hockey. We're growing. We expect that number to approach 400 in the next year and 2 years, and we're continuing to grow in the younger numbers. The popularity of the Rhapsody Rush has sure helped us, and we've had success on the ice as well. You know, we've won some state championships in the varsity program here in the last 2 years. Just some history there, and I'm going to let James talk some more about those things. But technically, we use about 60,000 gallons a month, and we use it to make ice, to run the concessions, to run the restrooms, and it's really an important component of our facility to provide that clean water for drinking. We actually have no drinking water right now for players other than hauling in bottled water and using that bottled water. So it's an ongoing issue that we have. We have looked at some alternatives. Are there other treatment alternatives for this type of water? There are. It is approaching $200,000 to construct a treatment system with a building, an electrical and a mechanical. And then we have an issue with the backwash water. Where do we send that backwash water? And so that item has been eliminated. We think it's a very close cost comparison between building the line and building a treatment system. But we feel like hooking up and having the fire suppression equipment is very needed. And we are asking for $200,000. At a minimum, we would sure like to ask for the oversizing, because I think if we don't get the oversizing, this project won't happen until several years from now. We're doing several other fundraising attempts, and I'll let James talk about those, but from a technical standpoint, I can answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schultz. We'll have you stand by
Okay.
when we get to this item. Right now, we're just on public comment. We'll now go to James Johns on item number 16 as well.
All right, council members, thank you very much. My name is James Johns. I'm the vice president of the Rushmore Hockey Association. You know, when we undertook this project to do improvements out there to the Thunderdome, we recognized that a water line and clean water is the lifeblood of our organization out there. We've made it work. Rushmore Hockey's been out there, and we have made it work, but at a toll. The high iron content does a number on our machinery, including our Zamboni, our pumps, our compressors, all of that. So will end up being a long-term cost savings for us to get the clean water to our facility. And so in looking at why do the water line improvement, you know, I took a look at the plan Rapid City in 2014. Rapid City adopted the master plan. And if you look at this water line and the feasibility of it, it fits a number of areas in the plan, Rapid City comprehensive plan. In that plan, it said by 2020, the strategic plan was to develop interconnected parks, arts, and recreation system that provide diverse opportunities for enjoyment and adds to our family-friendly quality of life. I can't imagine a sport more than hockey right now that does provide for entertainment and quality of life for families. We do have a community rink at the Roosevelt Rink, but one of the reasons we have the Thunderdome out where we do is because the hottest commodity in Rapid City right now is ice. There simply isn't enough ice for all the people that want to use ice in Rapid City. So having the Thunderdome out there, using the Thunderdome, took weight off of the Roosevelt Ice Rink. Last year we rented $18,000 worth of ice time from Roosevelt so that we could get skaters the ice time that they need. RHA continues to be a nonprofit. We have an ongoing agreement with the Club for Boys where we bring skaters out that can't afford to skate. We put them on scholarship, give them rental equipment, and put them on the ice out there. We provide youth development for the community's youth. And, there's widespread growth across Rapid City for ice events to include the Rush. And I'd like to say that, I think that our success out at the Thunderdome has provided for a good quality of life for Rapid City, bringing in numerous tournaments, bringing in people that really form the foundation of what the Rush is trying to do at the Civic Center. In the Rapid City Master Plan, we talk about economic stability and growth. When we talk about economic impact and what this will do for our community, right now the Thunderdome hosts several tournaments throughout the year. Each time these tournaments come into town, we bring in players and teams and families from all over the state. Just doing a rough estimate for 45 teams coming into Rapid City for tournaments, 15 players per team, 675 weekends of family time, basically equates to $337,000 of economic impact to Rapid City. So the water line and the improvements doing this water line have a huge economic impact on Rapid City, not just for the Rushmore hockey players out there at the rink. So I ask that you strongly consider this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. We now have one speaker request form for item number 19. Mr. Kyle Treelar.
Hello, I'm Kyle Treloar, and I'm here representing Dream Design and the property owner, Dr. Pankratz, for the Shortcut subdivision. I put together just a real quick slideshow to help support kind of our justifications on why we felt it was necessary to appeal an exception that we had applied for. To start, basically, this is a one-lot subdivision. We're platting about a 2.5 acre lot out of a 22-acre parcel. And this is right on the intersection of Elkville Road and East Anamosa Street. Typical to any project, the preliminary subdivision plan went through planning, zoning, city council, everything was approved. One of the exceptions that was approved was, or one of the conditions that was approved was the requirement for 2 water mains in East Anamosa Street. There currently is a 16-inch water main in East Anamosa Street, so we turned in an exception to not require the construction of the second water main, which was denied by city staff. We met with city staff to understand or better understand the justification of why the request was denied. We talked it over with them, and afterwards or immediately before we had turned in the request for the appeal. What we had discussed was because the water main, the second water main, was identified in the utility master plan of Rapid City, that it would be needed to expand the growth of Rapid City. But here's where it, and this is really why we feel it's not needed at this time. This is an awfully busy map, but you can see there's a little stretch of purple on the southeast corner there, on the corner of Elkville and Anamosa Street. That's a 20-inch water main that fronts our one lot. To the west, there's a 2.5 mile green green line, that's a length of water main that would need to connect this to the nearest available water source, or approximately 2,000 feet up Elkvale to a elevated reservoir, 1.5 million gallon elevated reservoir that's not there yet either. Essentially, because we already have a water main that's serving what's called a lower pressure zone. This second piece of water main, this 20-inch that's been asked of us, has no source of water. And according to the conversation that we have, there's no immediate plans for any expansion of this high-level water zone in the near future anyways, so we don't have a timeline of when it might be used. Here's another kind of image for scale. You can see Menards on the west side of this image where the green line starts, and you can see Elkvale on the east side. The green line is 20-inch water main that's required to hit our little one-lot subdivision. The little purple is the 550 feet that we're being asked to provide. We do have a 16-inch water main that fronts this property, and we also have an unplatted balance south of this. Well, that's important because in order for the property owner to do anything with this remaining 19 acres, he will have to plat that particular piece, and will fall into the same requirement at that point in time too. This lot is served by the low pressure zone. As you can see, we got, here's the exhibit from the Burns and Mack master plan showing that our lot, which is down in the bottom of this thing, falls within the pressure zone. So we are served with that 16 main that's already existing. Lastly, we have some soil tests that were taken nearby for a different pressure, or for a different project, but we've got severely corrosive soil. So any particular water main that we put in right now that's going to be dry is just going to sit in the ground and essentially be eaten away by the soils until such time that it can be used. And finally, we have a cost. The city has agreed to provide oversize to help compensate the property owner, but at the end of the day, it's still a $240,000 project to put in 550 feet of dry water main. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trelor. We'll now go to item number 20. I have two speaker request forms. Mr. Albert Gonzalez, please.
My name is Albert Gonzalez from Albert Small Engine. Mr. Rauch went to my shop before I came over here, and then he got some things that we can do in the back and between the building and the other property of the wall behind my building. And he would like to put stripes, lines, 10 feet, because 20 feet and they divide it by 2. But I think it's liability to do that because the car will be swim by right by my door. Sometimes I got handicapped people, older people. When I push the mowers out, the car is going to be flying through it. And to me, that's not an alley anymore. It's like a highway sometimes. People just fly through there. If they do that, the car 10 feet or 11 feet, car is going to be flying by my wall, right next to it. And that's, I think it's a lot of liability. And my opinion, I talked to my lawyer, he said he don't take any, I disagree with that for now, because it's pretty dangerous. Like kids, older people. I think it's a different solution to do it, like Mr. Alvantes, chiropractor. Sometimes he get out of the car and told the customer to move to the side because I'm busy in the front trying to take care of the other customers. He honked at the customers. Instead of coming help me to, he said, move to the side so he can move through it. But he won't do it. Mr. Rod, sometimes he does it, because I can't do it by myself. There's an alley right now. It's not a street. So we need to get somewhere so we can help each other. I can't do it all by myself. So that's the only thing I got to say. Anything else, just talk to my lawyer, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. One more speaker request form, also on item number 20, Mr. Tracy Kersnack. Did I get it right?
Very good.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Tracy Kersnack from Audio Video Solutions, and we're in the same neighborhood next to Albert. And I just want to reiterate that I think most of the issue is with the loading and unloading of the lawnmower equipment and such, and that's kind of where the focus has been. But I ran into Mr. Wright downtown yesterday and spoke with him and wanted to mention that whatever happens also affects us as well, because of the freight trucks that we have come in, and they do block the alley. And I just wanted to protect our interest in that fact that it isn't just Albert that blocks the alley. And we've had equipment come in that weighs upwards of 1,000 pounds, so other than having the freight truck come into the alley and use it the way alleys are intended, I don't know of another solution for that. So I guess that's really what I wanted to reiterate, is that whatever decision is made, it's going to affect everybody. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Have no more speaker request forms. Did we miss anybody? You would state
My
your
name is Chuck Roush. I'm the owner of Roush Monuments and Modestone. We have property in that alley also. What I would suggest to the city to help resolve the issue is a painted line down the center of the alley. This would indicate to people that there's two halves in that alley, and perhaps when they want to come in and unload their vehicles, they would tend to stay over to one side or the other. Wouldn't matter which side, that would leave half the alley open, which would be 10 feet. I've got a flatbed truck, which has, we use through there, but it is 8 feet wide, would still fit. And it's just a stripe. It's not a block, it's not a wall, it's a stripe on the alley. Someone actually needs to be out a little bit, they can do it, but at least they'll be aware of where they're at in that alley. Very simple deal, costs the city $10. It doesn't work, it doesn't work. So what? It's worth a try. The other issue is a little bit of a side issue here, but the city has not maintained my alleyway. I would prefer that the city would pave my alley, but it's gravel. I paid for the gravel. I had it patrolled and maintained myself. The city at the end of that alley, beyond my property, is mud. And service vehicles go in there and they back out and they mud all the way down past Alberts and the rest of us with their tracks. City vehicles and utility vehicles have done this. Also, I have a sign on my alley, says no parking anytime, and the arrow points both directions. So I am not allowed to park, period, in my alley. There's no such sign on Albert's alley. Why not? Isn't there a discrimination going on there against me? Put a sign up in Albert's alley and say no parking. I'm really not asking for that, but I'm asking for fair treatment.
Thank you, Mr. Roush. We have no more speaker request forms. I'll now close public comment on items 16 through 20. First item up is item number 16, which is a request from Rushmore Hockey Association for city participation in funding for the construction of a water transmission main that will provide water service for the Rushmore Hockey facility. We have a motion to approve by Alderman Wright, a second by Alderman Roberts. And we are open for discussion. I'll go to Mr. Wright, please.
For the record, Terry, the oversized cost is $200,000? What is it?
I think staff's opinion is that there is no oversize on this because, as was mentioned, the fire flow requirements require a 12-inch main. So what they're installing, the 12-inch main, is what's required to get the fire flows out there. So in our opinion, technically, there's no oversize associated with this project.
Okay, then I'm going to ask you, why are you asking for $200,000?
To clarify, the cost to go from 8-inch to 12-inch is about $79,000. And early on in this process, I had understood that, it was oversizing cost. After some work with Tim and the fire department and folks, I understand the position that we're required to build a 12-inch for fire flow reasons. And I understand that, and I don't dispute that. But we're asking for $200,000 to help aid our construction of this project because of funding problems that we have. We have gone to the bank and asked for a loan increase. The bank has given us a loan increase to the maximum amount, and we are at the top limit of that. And without doing that $200,000, we're going to be in trouble, I guess, financially in trying to get this thing done. We've done some other fundraising. We had the Craft Hockeyville, which was supported well by the community, voting online, and we ended up with $20,000 out of that. We have other fundraising. We get business sponsors throughout the community. We have basically kind of tapped our regular sponsors out, and so that's where we're at. We have the highest rates in the state for skating by far, generally about double of what other communities are. And I'm not here to complain about that. I'm just pointing out that we've kind of limited out on what we are able to charge for our members to skate out there. And so we're asking for $200,000. If we have to pay the full $320,000 and some dollars for the 12-inch, we are probably looking at delaying this project for several years.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz.
Another
Mr. Wright, you
question
still have the
for
floor.
Terry. What I don't want to see us doing is building a line now, if we do this, and then I know the adjoining or an area properties that do not want to be attached, but if they were, say Forest Products and Deadwood Fuels, I think is their name, if there were another industry in that area that would want to tap into this, is 12-inch big enough? Or do we know? Or is that an unfair question?
Go to
Let
city.
me just cover this, because I know in '79 we extended to history to the landfill. When the port of entry came in, they put in a 2-inch line, which I didn't understand, up to 6, and it should have been 10. But I don't want us to do the same thing if we're going to need it. Go ahead.
Mr. Tech?
If I may, we have a current 12-inch line that we'll be tying on to.
Okay.
Obviously, if we get a whole bunch of industry hooked up to this dead-end line, no, it won't be enough. We'll require a loop somewhere back into the system. I can't tell you where that will be today. That's all development driven.
That's okay, thank you. But the maximum you have feeding is 12-inch. Okay,
Correct.
thank you. That end of my questions, thank you.
Thank you. I see no other lights. Is there any more discussion? Seeing no more discussion, the motion on the table is to approve this request. And the only thing I would offer as the chair is to make sure that there's a funding source tied to this request. Mr. Wright?
That's exactly what I was going to ask. We need more discussion on this, how we're going to pay for it. That's why I open up for discussion, and let's talk about the price tag. We now know that they need more than the oversized cost, or whatever it is, to make it economically feasible for themselves. Okay, but how are we going to pay for it? And this construction would occur outside of the city limits, basically? And that's allowed under our policy, correct?
Yes, the water policy allows the service of water, which is what you previously approved on the agenda. As far as a funding source, our normal go-tos for projects like this would be an oversized cost out of the Water Enterprise Fund, which would be funded by the ratepayers. Potentially the Utility Support Fund, which is the .16 sales tax fund. Actually, Vision Fund would not be allowable here because it's not in city limits, and the city council made the decision that they were not going to expend sales tax Vision Fund dollars outside the city limits. So that's a little ironic, but
the .16, that would be, there'd be no future cost to them. It would be paid, in theory, back or whatever by revenue from the sale of water, correct? Because there's no, .16 is cash out, right? It's not a loan.
well, correct. It's not a loan. If there were connection fees established for the adjacent property owners out there, then, potentially that money would go back into the utility support fund. I will say the utility support fund is pretty tapped right now for the next 3 years, and there are several other projects looming out there that would like funding. North Deadwood Avenue expansion is one of them that we were going to tap heavily the utility support fund, but right now the money is not available for that project. So I can't give you a good revenue source at this point.
If I may, may I make a friendly amendment to my motion that we approve contingent upon acceptable funding?
If that's okay with the seconder. Mr. Roberts, I believe, was the
Not
seconder?
at this time right
Okay, sorry, Jerry, that friendly amendment fails. Are you
I'm
yielding
not
the
going to
floor?
accept, then I'm not going to vote for approval on this without that contingent after our discussion, because we need to identify how it's going to be paid for.
Okay, currently, though, the motion on the floor is to approve with no amendments, no boundaries. We'll go to Alderman Estes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I see it in item number 13, we just approved the concept of selling water outside the city limits for this organization. And of course, 16 years for the construction costs. And I grew up in this hockey deal. I'm one of the parents that we used to pump water out of Rapid Creek into the tennis courts, and we used to drive our kids to Gillette to practice. And one of my son's team won a state deal, and we practiced on inline skates on a tennis court, and then when the Vision Fund decided to build Roosevelt, and of course this is my recollection, I'm just, all the hockey parents thought that Roosevelt deal was going to be for the hockey kids, and they're just the request for ice time is so competitive, and the Thunderdome was built, by a lot of hard work by parents, and a few people stuck their neck out and signed guaranteed loans, and the kids, the hockey players, went out and tied rebar. This is a community project, and I realize we got a funding source, and I know we got probably 30 miles of street in this town that needs paving, and we get all kinds of people pulling at us for money, but we've got an organization here that says, we got a $330,000 project, and we'll pay 40% of it. We don't get that very often. So, I would like to send this off with a funding source, but right now I don't think, we just flat don't have a funding source answer in my mind. And, I know we've talked about, this project's outside the city limits. I don't know how many, we just spent millions of dollars on a water line to send water out to, the airport, which is in city, within the airport itself is city limits, but that water line travels through miles of property that's not in the city limits, and we're gonna sell water. We were doing that because we felt it was our obligation to help and sell, make clean water available to people who didn't have it. We've figured out how to get some. We're going to have tap fees, and we're going to figure out how to get reimbursed. But I'd like to figure out how to get these guys $200,000 and figure out how to. I know it's hard, and you can't do an assessment project because the land between here from point A to point B isn't within the city. But I think we can establish some fairly healthy hookup fees as that develops to get reimbursed. So I did a heck of a lot of talking, and I didn't come up with a single answer, and I'm sorry.
But at least you're looking, Mr. Estes, and we appreciate that. We'll go to Alderman Roberts, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to make a motion and then hold the floor for discussion. My motion would be to send this to council without recommendation.
We have a substitute
Second.
motion and a second to send this to council without recommendation, and Alderman Roberts, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Terry, I think you were a little bit misunderstood, because the way the Vision Fund has changed, we can fund projects outside of the city limits now. So I think that this is a very good project for Vision Fund money, and that's the reason I want to take it to council so we can talk to Pauline and see what we have that's, that what we still have in the Vision Fund that isn't asked for. And I think it's roughly $1 million, if I remember right, a little over $1 million. But whatever, that doesn't matter. We need to talk to Pauline first. I do not think this is a good project for the water utility. I do not think the ratepayers should be paying for this. This is something that the general fund taxpayers should be paying for. These people, as they come into town and they're paying sales tax, they should be paying for this project. So it's a wonderful project for the Vision Fund. I think that's the funding source we need to look at for this. I think that this is something that we should do. I support it 100%. I think that there's only upside on this project. So anyway, I look forward to the council and the discussion on the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Wright, if it's okay, I'd like to go to our Public Works Director first.
I'll cancel my request because John took care of my concern. Thank you.
Mr. Wolterstorff?
Just one other, I guess, question. There's been a few different numbers tossed around here today. There's the $200,000 figure, but the oversize, I think, that was mentioned was $79,000. So I'm just curious the exact dollar figure you guys are trying to tune in on here.
The request from Hockey, Mr. Wolterstorff, is $200,000. Originally, they believed that the minimum they would appreciate is the oversize. You're telling us that there is no actual oversize, so I believe that the request is for $200,000. And I see some nods over on the side of the room. Are there any further questions? Motion on the floor is a substitute motion to move to council without recommendation so that we can kind of take a look at what we may have for options and hopefully have something at least a little bit more manageable Monday night. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Item number 17, discussion on road compaction issues. Alderman Ron Weifenbach is not present. Perhaps we can either look for a motion to continue or roll this to council. Mr. Estes, if you would.
I make a motion, we roll this to council without action, but I would like to hold the floor if we could.
We have a motion by Estes, second by Mr. Wright to roll to council without recommendation. Mr. Estes, you have the floor.
Thank you. If I could ask Terry or Dale, whichever one wants to answer a question, if I could. So Dale, whether the city's doing a project or whether a developer's doing a project and it involves streets, water and sewer and everything, we have a minimum guidelines for compaction tests of the trenches, which I believe is like for every 2 foot of lift, there's one density test for every couple hundred feet or something like that.
That's correct. We have a frequency of testing that is required based on how much depth you have in your trench as well as how many linear foot of pipeline you're installing. And the same goes for the street compaction as well.
Would it be difficult to send those minimum standards out to the council before Monday's meeting so that we all had a chance to look at it, or is it really?
No, we can, that's right out of our standard specifications. We can attach that to this item for council.
I just thought that might be helpful for the council to understand. I mean, there are minimum standards. A developer, if he's doing streets, he has to hire an independent agency to perform them tests for them, and then those test results are then sent to the city for their file. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thanks. And we don't give anybody purple ribbons for doing more tests or being overachievers.
There are a minimum amount of tests required. We very seldomly receive more than the minimum.
Thank you. All right, I yield.
Thank you. We'll go to Alderman Wright, please.
For Monday night, would it be possible to just have a 3 to 5 minute presentation from you, Dale, on what we do? And first, before we begin questions?
About 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Efficiency.
2 minutes is fine with me. I'm not the one that needs to hear it, but thank you.
Thank you. Motion on the floor is to send this to council without recommendation and with extra requested information for Monday night. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Item number 18, code enforcement issue at 3835 Canyon Lake Drive, brought forward by Alderman Jerry Wright. And we'll go to Alderman Wright, please.
Thank you. I think sometimes in this issue, some people might think I'm beating up on staff, and I'm not. I think in our code enforcement arena, where we have issues, where we have nuisances about our community, I'm just wondering if we have the right structure and resources to handle them the way I think they probably should be. This particular case, as I understand it, I was contacted in February by an owner of property adjoining this property in question. And very first line says, the last year I inquired about the condition of my neighbor's property. This individual was frustrated because it hadn't been improved or changed or whatever. And I'm just looking for how can we make this more effective so we don't have these kind of conditions evolve to the point where this one did. I think that people turn to us for assistance, and throughout this process I have heard that while the individual has to file a complaint, I don't know why that's necessary. If there's a violation, why can't we initiate the complaint, or why can't we initiate action? I'd like that clarified. Issues of access, again, I know that this property is very, very unique in that there's a landlocked piece of property that has easements on it, and there were questions about whether they could enter the property or not, even though the owner said they could. I think we need to take a look at this and how we can do a better job, more proactive job in taking care of code enforcement issues within our community. I don't know how many of you have been out to this property. I understand there's some cleanup going on today. Is that correct? I know it's been there longer I know it was there probably last year and probably longer. This buildup was not overnight and wasn't within the last 3 or 4 months. How do we prevent that from happening? How do we get reactive or proactive action? And how can we support our citizens better?
Mr. Wright, I do see that we have representatives from code enforcement here. Would you like to direct some of those questions?
I've raised the
staff?
questions, and if they want to address them, they certainly can. Okay. And any member of the council can certainly chime in, but thank you. I got involved simply because a citizen of the community was frustrated and not, in their opinion, getting the results that they thought they should. Thank you.
Okay, we do have an update as of today. This property, we were notified that the property owner is cooperating and is taking care of some of these issues. Would staff like to broach the subject of why it took so long to get a result? We will go to Barb Garcia.
Okay, let's start with when we were first notified of the problem. We were notified, he talked to them back in February. In March, on March 10th, Andy went to the property, and from what he could see from the legal access we had, he wrote up an appliance and some miscellaneous debris, and a couple of cars or a car to be removed from being parked on the grass. The gentleman complied. We signed off on that. Now, as Jerry said, this is a very unique property. The property has 2 driveways on it. There was a complaint issued on this property. We don't have the ability to go on an owner's property without their permission. We can only write up those things we can see from the public access. This property is surrounded on 3 sides with a lot of vegetation and fences. His house, he has a house that sits lengthways this way. The width, the narrower side is to Canyon Lake Drive. It goes down this way, and then he has a garage across the back this way that extends beyond the back end. It is right on the curve of Canyon Lake Drive. So we have a narrow area over on this side where the initial driveway is to look back through to the backyard. The majority of her complaint was on the backyard. from what she could see from her place to this property. We could not see it. He has many automobiles. The other part of her initial complaint was too many vehicles on the property. The ordinance doesn't restrict the number of vehicles somebody has on their property, as long as they are parked on gravel or hard surface. From what could be seen from our access points, they were parked legally, except for the one that was up in front on the grass, and he moved that one. He has a pontoon boat, a fairly large one. He has an enclosed trailer. He has a dump truck. He had 2 pickups that have front end snow shovels. He probably had, maybe 3 or 4 other vehicles. Am I missing anything vehicle-wise? Oh, okay. But he has the space. He has the paved area and the gravel area for those. Now, her contention is that some of them on the back corner were on grass. From what we could see, because of the blockage on both sides, even if we went to the right-hand side as you're facing the house, there's a very narrow, you can pretty much only see straight down that driveway, because his house is here, and there's a fence and all sorts of vegetation on this side. Even going around the corner on the other street, you can't see through to see what was in there when Andy did those initial visits. And if you look at the pictures that Jerry posted of the one with all the vehicles, as you're looking back there, those vehicles at the height they're at, you can't see anything on the ground. Her complaint was there was a lot of wood and junk down on the ground back there. There was a Quonset hut that used to have a cover on it where he kept most of the stuff. So there was stuff sitting on the ground inside this open Quonset hut. And there were pieces of material flapping in the breeze. So we could not enter the property by her own writing that she provided in the emails to the mayor's office. She did have access to her place across his driveway that wraps around his house, round past his garage, and goes into hers. They had an agreement, but according to her, it wasn't. She didn't know that it was in writing. She couldn't provide us anything that said it was in writing. The other access that she started using, because she said he kept parking too many vehicles along her access and she couldn't get into her house. So he said, use the driveway on the opposite side of the house, which is just the straight shot back. So they had a verbal agreement to use that. We were advised by the attorney's office that we could not go on his property to get to hers to look at his to write him up. Since we were going to be there solely for the issue of being an enforcement action, even with her permission, we could not go to her house to look into his backyard to write it up, and that was by the attorneys. So we did not go anywhere except where we could. So in those times that Andy went out, she said, there are vehicles parked in the front yard and a washing machine. He went out and wrote it up. The guy moved them. Or they weren't there when he was there. There were 3 vehicles originally. And he went, they use them daily. So when we're there during the day, they were gone. We went, what day was it we went? Tuesday. Jeff, I, and Andy all drove out there to look at it again. This particular day, the cars were all parked. There was a truck on the grass. There was the pontoon boat now parked on the grass, which we've looked at other pictures, older pictures that are on Rapid Map and on Google Map, that showed he used to park them along the side on gravel in his driveway. But now they were up on the front of the yard along with a trailer and another vehicle on the side. So we wrote up 4 vehicles to be moved, and we wrote up now, because it was winter and there wasn't a lot of vegetation out, we got out, walked on the sidewalk over as far as we could, and we could see, and he did not have the vehicles parked in the driveway that were in Jerry's picture this time. So we could actually see past and to the ground, and we saw piles of stuff there. She provided additional pictures to Jerry. She never wanted to sign a complaint. We could have written up all the stuff that if she had sworn on a statement, day one. She wanted anonymity. She did not want him to know. She did not want to sign anything. The email she even sent to Jerry said, "This is for your eyes only." So we were trying to honor confidentiality and only do it from what we could see, because he would know immediately if we showed him those pictures, which we actually didn't get until this week.
Thank you so much for the clarification, Ms. Garcia. Since it was in response to Alderman Wright's concerns, Mr. Roberts, is it okay if we go back to Jerry Wright? Okay. Mr. Wright?
Thank you, Barb. I'm hearing a lot of discussion in defense of what you did or didn't do, and that's fine. It's appropriate. But I'm also asking the question of why can't we do a better job as a city? Why should a citizen have to file a complaint? Why can't we? Why should that person be held accountable to bring the enforcement of the city law upon the process?
50%.
I'm not done with my questioning.
Okay.
You might take some notes. And this is not a new problem out there, because I've observed issues there for quite some time. And I think that the complainant, if that's the correct word, would verify that. And I think the bottom line is the access. I just find it concerning that the complainant can get pizza delivered and everything else brought down that driveway to her property, no questions are asked, and then she's willing to ask city enforcement to come on her property. It's a legal access. I have a copy of that easement, by the way. If you don't, I have it.
I don't.
And I can give it to the attorney's office. Why we wouldn't go in there? When the problems are apparent, black and white, just bulging, we ignored them. I think we let somebody down. And I think that to put this on an individual individual citizen within the community, it's not trained in law enforcement, not code enforcement, not an attorney, just turns to us, the city that's charged with providing the public health, safety, and welfare. Why don't we cooperate better? And if there's a thing we need to do to get this better, I think we need to talk about it. To me, the issue is the problem from the curb, if that's where we're going to limit our inspection from, is apparent. I think it warrants. I know, I'm not a law enforcement guy myself, but I do know that if there's reasonable suspicion in criminal activity, we can get a search warrant. Why can't we do that with this kind of stuff? Is that possible? I mean, there's no excuse in my book for this person not being able to get someone down to her house to look out her front porch and see the problem. To use the excuse that we don't have access, I think, is inexcusable. I said my piece for now. I appreciate what you're doing now, and I know there's other situations in other community that probably need the same address. And this property is very unique. The original plat, I believe, was in about 1949. This goes back, I believe, before that part was even in the city. And things were handled differently and incorrectly. But this house is landlocked, and it's a mess in a lot of ways, but I think we could have done a better job. And if you need tools and whatever to do it, we need to work on that. But thank you for now.
Well, Mr. Wright, in defense of staff, I believe because of the uniqueness of the situation, they did consult with the city attorney's office. And
Madam Chairman, I want to correct you, and I'm not attacking staff. I'm correcting what occurred.
Accuse you of attacking staff. I said in defense of staff. Go to Mr. Roberts, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Barb, for everything you do. You guys do a great job, and it's unfortunate at times we have to work within the confines of the law. But you know, in North Rapid, we have a lot of different issues with code enforcement. And I brought quite a few in the last 4 years before you and before code enforcement. And I know that you do what you can do with what you have. And I think that's where the discussion needs to go. You know, and I don't want to pick on Jerry, but if Jerry believes that our code enforcement officers are supposed to be the regulatory people and not the citizens, we need one hell of a lot more staff. So, and I think that for the job that you're given, you do a tremendous job. And I know that there's a lot of tough issues out there. And I will give you one example from the dais. A few years back, I had brought something forward for a citizen about a boat that was parked, on the wrong side of the sidewalk. And when the owner was asked to move it, I decided I would take a real good look at that area and see how many other boats were parked on that part of the sidewalk. Well, within a 10-block period, there was 167 boats that were out of compliance. So if our code enforcement officer is supposed to go out and look for every violation out there, unless we have one heck of a lot bigger staff, that is never going to happen. So I just wanted to thank you for what you do. I'm glad you're there. We get issues done as quickly as we can. I think Jerry should be happy that this issue has been worked on in 3 months. I know that I have an issue that is going to be coming back to you because it hasn't been taken care of yet, but it's been 2 years. And things happen. And anyway, I just wanted to let you know how appreciative I am for what you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. We'll go to Alderman Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I make a motion to acknowledge.
I have a motion to acknowledge by Estes, a second by Roberts. Any further discussion? Go to Alderman Wright.
I think my intent is to get the system better. I know that we have speeders in our town, and we normally don't expect individuals to arrest and do radar. That's the police department's job. And I think if someone calls in and says there's a speeding problem, we should handle it the way we do it. I think code enforcement should be the same way. The other question I have, that we need to elevate this effort. John said more people. Maybe that's what needs to happen. Maybe it needs to be elevated to a more recognized and acknowledged and appreciated function of the city, not a reactive but proactive. And as a comment, I've gone to, I don't think code enforcement is even listed in our phone book, is it?
I believe it is.
I have not. I've gone to the City of Rapid City direction. I may be wrong. In the Rapid City, in the Quest phone book and the other phone books, I've had trouble finding it. I think we need to elevate your efforts and resources if that's what's needed. And I think if there's some things we need to clarify in the ordinance, we should do that. I think accessibility is an issue. I think if we have a problem that's apparent and obvious, why are we hamstrung to the point we were on this and to get results? It's difficult. This is a situation, I know that if I lived next door to it and I was not able to resolve it, I would have been really frustrated. And I think Libby's been really patient. Excuse me, I'm mentioning a name I probably shouldn't, but I think it's been a tough deal for that person. And you're right, there's other places like it, but this is a very unique. And yes, I appreciate what's happening. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Motion on the floor is for acknowledgement. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Motion to acknowledge the code enforcement issue at 3835 Canyon Lake Drive does pass. Moving on to item number 19, which is appeal of denial of request for exception to not install a parallel water main along East Anamosa Street. And I will look for a motion. Alderman Wright.
I guess I have some questions before I want to make a motion.
Okay. What are your questions?
Is it true that the line that's being proposed, the 20-inch line over it, there's no immediate plans to connect that to a line in the near future? When is it? Can we use, was it warp or whatever? Can we do that type of thing and have it installed when construction occurs versus now?
That's a very good question, Alderman Wright. Yes, a warp is always a tool that you can use to gain reimbursement for costs that the city or some other person would incur at a future date. Yeah, we've got no immediate plans to install this water main or extend it. However, as part of our criteria and planning for the future, it makes sense to get this section installed as it most directly benefits the applicant's property and not just the piece that he's proposing to plat, but everything on that hillside going north.
But we could go into one of these warps, if that's the right word. Is that acceptable to the petitioner versus?
Mr. Trelaw, if you would approach the podium, and we'll get this on the record, please. I mean, you're wearing a suit, so we might as well get you on camera.
Smile a lot, Kyle.
Doesn't happen very much.
We have discussed, the idea of bringing a waiver of right to protest for this particular property. There is a potential lot sale that's going to accompany this plat. So there's somebody that's already kind of spoken for this lot, and they would not agree to a waiver of right to protest. Now, I can't speak for the doctor because he's not here. They still own and control the southern portion of that unplatted property. They may or may not.
So they kind of fenced us in the corner to guarantee that we get this water line. Is if they're not willing to do the warp, we say put it in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Not a good position to be in, is it?
And to kind of follow that up, we're platting off the northern portion of this lot. They still have that full southern 20 acres that, in order to really make it usable or to plat it or transport, it has to run through the same process again, and we'll have to fall under these same stipulations again. So this particular exception is only for that one lot.
Well, I would suggest that they put it in the ground or sign a warp, one or the other. It's my thinking right now.
Okay, we'll see what other kind of thinking.
See where it goes.
All right, Mr. Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I was kind of thinking out loud. Jerry was asking the same question where I was leading to, because without doing at least a warp, I mean, to not require it is to me, it allows the developer to sell the piece of land to somebody without a fair warning that there's a water line to be paid for somewhere down the road, and that's what we get in. That's what happens in my short 2 years on here. We end up the taxpayers have to solve those problems because somebody claims they weren't aware, or nobody told me this. And is a warp, if a warp is signed, then does that go with the title policy so that it's an encumbrance on the land?
Yes, it's recorded at the courthouse on the property.
Thanks. And Mr. Trelaw, he always showed the one piece. I'm a little confused when we're talking about another 20 acres south or north, I followed the other green line where there's several, an additional 2,000-3,000 feet of 20-inch line, but I guess I'm not.
Would you like it brought back up?
Well, yeah. Could you show me what you're talking? Could this be served in a different way? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
Can we bring up the?
I don't know who's in the booth, but they're on it.
So this right now. This is a one lot subdivision.
How many acres is that?
That's 2.77 acres.
Okay.
What you see highlighted in the darker black line, that's the lot that we're requesting. If you go back, so right here, this is a rotated view. So north is to the side. You can see the proposed lot 1 on the left-hand side of what I'm looking at. What you got? Dale's going to highlight the remainder property here. So this is
Currently, this is a lot, or a legal description rather, it's unplatted. They're wanting to just plat this northern piece off right here. This would remain an unplatted balance. Make sense?
So the unplatted balance still affronts Anamosa Street.
So Where's the 550 feet? At the top of this map? Show me where the 550 feet is.
It's along here.
Are those two parcels that are split by that road, are the two different pressure zones, one on one side, one on the other?
No, they're the same pressure zone. Immediately to the north of this property with the X on it is the pressure zone boundary.
So if you look at this map, we got the scribbles on here now, but you can see Elkvale and Anamosa. There's a little box. That's approximately where this one lot is. That neon green line, that's the boundary between your low and your high pressure. When you talk about the different alignments or where, what's the best way to serve this high pressure zone, we have had discussions in our office of alternate alignments, but that's because this particular landowner that's selling off this one lot, he owns the full section north of this lot as well, and so he's like Dale was referring to, he is stands to benefit on this as soon as he can either tie into the line by Menards or somehow have the 1.5 million gallon reservoir constructed. But that being made, those alternate alignments, we've either used the section line, which is immediately north, or different road alignments through this property. But that's really neither here nor there because it's all up in the air right now in future planning through that full undeveloped section.
I don't have any further questions right now, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Alderman Roberts, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and you went right back to the picture I wanted. Thank you, Kyle. I have a question for staff on this one. What do you think the time frame from hooking in the Anamosa extension to Elkvale Road would be? I know it's not on the 5-year plan, so
It's identified in our long-range transportation plan as a future connection. There are absolutely zero funding identified for this project.
10 years, 20 years?
There is no funding identified for this project.
Okay. That's one of the things that concerns me is putting this water line in the ground and having nothing it's going to service. And when we may or may not hook up to it, it may not even be usable at that time. I have one more question. On the Anamosa extension that was completed a few years back, did any of the property owners that are now serviced by that water line, did they have to put in their 20-inch water line, or was that done by the city?
If you're referring to the section north of North Street, over towards Walmart, is that the section you're referring to?
The section north of Menards, the new development that's not yet started developing on that, what's it? Anamosa Crossing.
Yeah, Anamosa Crossing was a developer's project, and they paid for their portion of the water main that was installed there.
The oversizing or the entire cost?
The city paid oversizing on it. They paid the base cost, just as staff is requesting on this as well, that the city would reimburse for the oversized portion of this 20-inch water main.
The only thing that really worries me about, and I am kind of the same thinking of, I think, where Brad was going, is if we tie a warp to this 2.7 acres of land that's going to be developed in the middle of nowhere, you're adding a tremendous amount of cost. You're basically making a 2.7 acre lot that nobody's going to buy because of the fact eventually when that comes in, even though it's going to service a huge area, they're going to be the ones that are responsible for that cost. Now, another question, I don't know if it has to go to the city attorney, if it has to go to staff, if that piece was put in and let's say just the economy's wonderful, 7 years from now, we put that new extension in. That water line is still usable. You can tie into it. That section of that water line that serves anything to the north or the south that anybody might want to tie into, does the developer get any of that money back for those costs of hooking into it to pay for their cost of this?
No, the developer is going to pay the base cost, and the city would pay the oversized cost. The base cost is exactly what it is. It's their frontage, it's their responsibility to pay that portion of the water main. The city would get reimbursement through a connection fee on the oversized portion that would be reimbursed for it. If I could change, this is probably a good example. The lot they're proposing to plat is on the north side. East Anamosa Street was constructed by the Rapid City Economic Development Foundation. Water main, sewer main, street was constructed at no cost to this property owner. So this property owner has received benefit of that project on the frontage of this proposed lot without having to pay any subdivision improvements whatsoever. Since they are now platting, looked at the criteria, looked at the infrastructure design manual, the only thing lacking in this section right away is this other chunk of water main, which they are requesting to have waived. So they will have virtually no improvements that they've had to pay for the subdivision of this property. So to say that this water main would be a burden on this property, I think is not quite correct.
I think if I can just.
It would be a burden on this lot. I'm not saying on this property as a whole. I'm saying on this lot. Now, if this subdivision was coming in and they were developing all 640 acres at one time, you know, this, or let's say a strip, 100 acres going up that way, this cost would be offset by the rest of the land. But at 2.77 acres, it just makes it very cumbersome to associate that with that piece of land. Has there been any discussion? Can you take it back to that original map, Kyle? So if you're looking at a section, can you show me roughly where the section is that he owns above that to the north? So as he plats, eventually he's going to be liable for more going to the west. I guess my question would be is, before this is platted and sold off, could there be a warp put on the entire piece of property so those costs would be distributed amongst the property as the property is platted off and sold?
I guess in my opinion, it would be, the warp would go on the current legal description, which is the 2-acre lot plus the 20-acre lot that is on the south side of Anamosa Street.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alderman Wright, please.
In the discussion on costs on this, the difference between a warp and putting it in now would be basically the inflationary cost of future construction, correct? And without being in the ground, I mean, we have no idea how long or what it's going to take for the rest of that to develop. And I just think it's a waste of resources to put a pipe in the ground and have it set there for 10 years, 20 years, or 5. But I do believe we should hold a warp. And I'd like to see if that could be discussed and brought back to us for Monday night. Would you be willing to do that, Kyle?
Yeah, I'd like to, of course, talk to the property owner, but I think that if we could have some sort of, motion with the warp, I think that.
Well, warp versus the installation. I'll just make a motion, we send it to council without recommendation, see what you can do between now and then.
Well, since you spoke first, we'll go to Alderman Estes. See if we
Okay, so
can
I don't get a
motion.
second, so okay. I'm gonna go get a cup of coffee then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I make a motion to deny their appeal and require the water line to be installed unless they sign a warp. At a minimum, a warp has to be signed. If I get a second, I guess I'll explain. Does that make sense? That we allow them not to install the water line, but they sign a warp so that down the road, if things change, they are responsible for it.
So you'll uphold the appeal as long as a warp is,
Thank you, Kyle.
Different way of wording it. but
Yeah. I'll uphold the appeal provided a warp is signed.
A motion has been made. Is there a second? Mr. Wright, if the speaker is on in the caucus room, could you please come back in? Well, when you need coffee, you need coffee. I mean, Mr. Wright, as you're walking in here, the motion on the floor is to deny the appeal and require the line to be installed unless a waiver of right to protest is signed by the property owner. Motion was made by Estes. We're looking for a second.
May I discuss before I second?
No,
May I second and hold the floor?
absolutely.
Second it.
Okay, second for discussion, but I believe
I still have the floor.
Estes still has the floor, so hold that thought.
I guess the reason why, I agree with Alderman Roberts that to require that to be put in right now is a burden on a small piece of ground of 2-point-some acres. However, that line goes with that piece of land. And if nothing ever happens out there, nothing more than that 2-point-some acres develops, it'll never be a burden because he'll never have to put it in. We'll never have, but if things pop out there and that person has control of that much land, it's not going to be much of a burden to put that 550 feet of line in my mind. And we will only require it if things are developing out there. We will only exercise our warp if things are happening out there and things are booming. And if that's happening, then to me, it's less of a burden. So that's my reasoning. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll go to Alderman Wright.
Well, we're getting pretty much what I wanted anyway, so I'm okay with this motion. I was hoping we could have the petitioner could have a discussion with their owner and so forth and come back with the ability to do the warp, but let's take it to council the way it's said.
Well, I believe Mr. Trelaw will check with the property owner and perhaps have a report for us Monday night, correct?
yep, absolutely.
Okay. Any further discussion on item number 19? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. Item number 20, final item on the agenda for today, recommendation on alley access located south of Clearview Lane in the 1100 block of Jackson Boulevard. Entertain a motion or discussion. We'll go to Alderman Wright, please.
I think the petitioners, or the concerned parties are working towards a resolution. Really what we have is an alley. It is sole access for at least 2 businesses. It's the only access for freight for, I think, basically all of them. And it is an alley, it's public right-of-way. It needs to be protected. It needs to be administered as an alley should be. The ordinance clearly says they can't block it between 8 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. without calling the police department. I'm not sure what that means because it isn't defined. And they can block it up to 30 minutes, and they can block it after 5:30 p.m. to 8 a.m. in the morning, I believe that is. What's really going to take is a cooperation between the owners, and it can work. And I've discussed it with several of them, and I think that that's what it's going to take. I think they have the right to access, they have the right to service, but they need to work with each other and solve the problem. It's not much we can do other than, there's no available property we can't widen it. It's 20 foot and that's it. And you have to live within those bounds. I think there's some discussion going on. I think maybe we'll get some results out of it. And I think it's not a public works issue. It was handed there originally. I think it's a code enforcement, law enforcement type thing, for lack of a better word, and neighbor cooperation. Thank you.
Any further discussion or a motion? Alderman Estes, please.
Thank you. I make a motion at this point in time to acknowledge, and would like to keep the floor if I get a second.
Motion to acknowledge has been made by Estes, second by Alderman Wright. Mr. Estes, you stop the floor.
Thank you. I mean, short of having a land stretcher, we can't do anything. You know, we have two parties at the end that, you know, I don't care if they got money, but they agreed that access had to get closed, and I assume they did that under full knowledge that their new access would be an alley, and I assume that they educated themselves on what kind of access that was going to be when they signed the deal with the state. Secondly, we have we've got an ordinance on alleys. I don't think we're going to change the designation of this, and I just think it's incumbent of all the parties to work together and follow the ordinance. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Estes. We'll go back to Alderman Wright.
I just want to say the city must be prepared to enforce its ordinances on this issue. And I think that with cooperation of the neighbors, it'll work. Thank you.
There's a motion on the floor to acknowledge. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion to acknowledge does carry, and I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.